I've been so excited about today because I'm driving a car that, when you think about it, is actually quite important in the modern Porsche 911 story. Now live on PistonHeads auctions is this Porsche 911 GT3 991 Gen 2. And the reason it's significant is that through hundreds of little tweaks and refinements, Porsche was able to transform one of the most controversial GT3s in history into an absolute masterpiece.
Remember to head over to PistonHeads.com to research and buy your next car. There's no such thing as a bad 911 GT3, but radical changes introduced at the start of the 991 generation had die-hard Porsche fans reaching for their pitchforks. The headline issues were the ditching of the GT3 defining Metzger engine and the 6-speed manual gearbox, with the PDK your only option for swapping cogs. Just as controversial were the changes baked into the 991 platform, namely the switch from hydraulic to electric power-assisted steering and the sheer size of its footprint. It was still utterly mesmerising, of course, but Porsche knew there was room for improvement, and boy did it deliver with the Gen 2.
Among the major updates was a new look. Now that's standard procedure for any midlife refresh, but on the 991 Gen 2, the more angular front end and repositioned rear wing, which is 20mm higher and 10mm further back than before, all helped reduce drag. More importantly, however, was the work that went on underneath the car. There's a lot more flicks and fins than before, inspired by the 911R to help accelerate air from underneath, spit it back out, improving downforce by 20% with a zero impact on drag. The next major change is at the back of the car. Gone is the 3.8 litre from the old car, and in its place a 4 litre naturally aspirated flat 6, the same capacity that could be found in the 911 GT3 RS and 911R. It's also very similar to the 4 litre motor found in the 992. The only real difference being the new car has individual throttle bodies, but the engine in here sits a lot closer to that than it does the 3.8 in the launch 991. This one, however, sounds especially good because it has a JCR titanium exhaust. It sounds like a cup car when you're really on it. But other than that, it's a stock and pretty understated car. We've got carbon fiber trim in here, Alcantara on the steering wheel, Race Tex, that's the Porsche speak for Alcantara, and you really can't go wrong with GT Silver. So under the radar is this spec, especially as there's no GT3 badge on the back, that it's easy to miss the yellow brake calipers, denoting carbon ceramics. It's got the comfy standard sport seats, yellow seat belts, and as you've probably noticed, it's got a PDK. Now the big thing about the 991 Gen 2 is that it brought back the 6-speed manual, but as I'll go over in a bit, I think the PDK suits it just as well. But overall, it's just a really solid GT3 spec.
You too can auction your car on PistonHeads. Just follow the link in the description, enter your details, and someone from our consignment team will be in touch. And be sure to register to bid because we have plenty of performance, classic and collectible cars going under the hammer, just like this GT3. Let me tell you why you should consider it.
One step closer to perfection is how Porsche GT boss Andreas Preuninger described the 991 Gen 2 GT3 in an interview with us. And I'm going to leave a link to that interview down in the description because if I were to cover everything off that Andreas said, this video would be longer than The Irishman. In essence though, Porsche left no stone unturned when updating the GT3, making a brilliant car even better. One of those areas was the steering. When the 991 launched, it switched from hydraulic to electric steering, and on the base Carrera, it just never quite worked out very well. It felt a little bit vague, didn't feel all that intuitive, was lacking the feel that we know and love about a Porsche steering rack. The Gen 2 has the same electronically assisted rack. However, they've made some major changes to the software that brings back so much of the feel, so much of the Porsche steering of old. The road I'm on is full of pits, bumps and gashes, and while the retuned suspension is filtering out all the really nasty stuff, the really core bits of texture are coming through my fingertips. It really does feel like the steering wheel is connected properly to the front axle, which wasn't always the case in earlier 991s. Weights up so nicely in the corners as well. It just feels intuitive, something that so many electric steering racks, particularly of this age, just weren't. They would always feel like driving a car with a Nintendo Wii remote, if you remember what that was like. This though, is just wonderful. But it's the engine that dominates, because when it goes up to 9,000 RPM, how could it not? The noise is just otherworldly. There's nothing like a naturally aspirated, motorsport inspired Porsche flat six. And when I say motorsport inspired, the engine in here was pretty much identical to the one used in the Cup car. The only real difference was the exhaust, and because we got the JCR titanium exhaust on this, my goodness, it does sound like you're driving the race car. The great thing is it sounds incredible and responds so well throughout the entire rev range. I find myself changing up at 6.5 because I feel like that's it, but no, there's still another 2,500 RPM still to go. So yes, I need to address the elephant in the room. I'm not reaching down to change gear. I'm flicking a couple of paddles behind the steering wheel. This is of course the 7-speed PDK, and I know that the manual was the really big selling point of the Gen 2. But the thing is, ever since the 991 was introduced, it was such a motorsport focused car. The old Metzger engines were just so well suited to a 6-speed manual, but this is just such an urgent car when everything is meticulously engineered for speed. You kind of find that the PDK kind of makes sense. I don't feel like I'm wanting for a manual at the moment. It's the 992 that's the newest 911 GT3. And there are some differences between that and this, the main being double wishbone suspension up front on the 992. And what that results in is just a sharper feeling on turn-in, but it also corners flatter and feels substantially firmer. Now, it's a cliche to say a 911 or a 911 GT3 is all the car you'll ever need, because it really depends on what your needs are. But it's just so good at everything it does. Handles beautifully, rides superbly, sounds like that. Kind of makes you wonder, what more do you want really? This example, with 15,500 miles on the clock, is estimated at 117,500 to 122,500, which is crazy when you think about it, because when these were new, they were so hard to get hold of. The premiums were utterly ludicrous. People were paying up to £100,000 more over the list price just to get one. And we see a similar thing with the 992 now. And you're getting just nearly identical performance. If this is one step closer to perfection, I really don't think Porsche's that far off.